Action!
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Grudge Report, where we're going to talk about the Foundation, specifically Season 1, Episode 4, Barbarians at the Gate. I'm Margaret Reeb. I work at the SETI Institute, and I am joined, as always, by Franck Marchis, who is a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute and chief science officer at Unistellar. Hello and welcome to the Grudge Report. Thank you so much for tuning in. As our title suggests, we like to talk about science fiction shows. We overanalyze them and we spoil them. So this is your official warning. If you have not seen The Foundation, Episode 4, Barbarians at the Gate, hit pause, go watch it, and come back, because we're going to talk about all the things that happen this episode. And thank you again so much for tuning in. So it's been a while, Franck, and we're no longer together geographically, physically. So it's good to see you, and I'm glad we're back to talk about the Foundation. What did you think about this episode? I'll give a quick summary in a minute, but what are your thoughts overall? Are you still liking the Foundation?
I still like the Foundation, yeah, even more and more. I like the fact that we can see more about Salvor and the interaction with the Foundation. Which is extremely interesting, I think, in terms of science, but also the story in the background. And I really like also seeing the Empire and this internal drama they have between those clones and the ripple effect that we talk about that with these religions and this. Obviously, we can see that the Empire is starting collapsing, and that's what Harry has been predicting. So.
Yes.
We're witnessing that.
We're witnessing it. So, as you said, we have two storylines for this episode. The first is on Trantor with the 3 Cleon clones and dealing with what we're thinking is the beginning of the collapse of the Empire. They're infighting and some other interesting things going on. And then we also have what's going on Terminus with Salvo, who is the warden, and the Anacreons who have just landed, and the conflict there, trying to figure out what's going on and how to protect the people on Terminus and the Foundation. So those are the two plot lines we have. There's also potentially a third that comes in at the very, very end, which we'll talk about, but that's a pretty big spoiler. So let's start with the Empire, of course, because they're always number one. And they're always doing this. So let's talk about something that reminded me a lot of a scene from Game of Thrones, where the youngest clone, who I believe we called Dawn, attempts to kill himself. But he can't because
he has a kinetic field, an aura that protects him. And this aura is very interesting because we see it twice in this episode. So we see when he basically is jumping from the top of the tower, I think, or something. And when he reached the ground, his motion is being stopped. And we can see kind of a field, a yellow field activated that stopped his body close to the surface. So first of all, I think he didn't stop right away, probably slow him down. Because if you stop like that at the height he had jumped and you stop instantaneously, the number of G that you got will kill you, probably. So I'm assuming that this aura is feeling that it's getting closer, that it's accelerating and speeding up. And that's why it's called a kinetic aura. They mentioned this word in the episode. And then we see the second time on the Emperor Day. Maybe you can tell what happened in the story.
Yes. So Day is having a dalliance with a lady, I think a consort of some sort, and they're having a conversation and about who can touch him physically, because he has this force field around him. And so it seems to be that all of the clones of the Empire, to protect themselves, have this field around them. So we see it in two ways.
And the Empire explained to the consort how to go through the field. And that's when we found out it's a kinetic energy field. He said, go slowly. So you probably know what the definition of kinetic energy. It's the energy which is proportional to the mass multiplied by the square of the velocity. So you've seen that at school. It's basically the amount of energy in joule generated by an object which is moving, right? So in this case, let's take like the hand of the consort, right? She's basically coming close to him first, and she tried to touch him, and she's been stopped by this kinetic energy aura. So yeah, he mentioned you have to go slow. So I did some calculation because I have an infinite amount of time.
Of course.
So I found out that the human hands at 0.6% the mass of a body. So assuming that she weighs 160 pounds, that's roughly 450 grams for just the hand, the weight of the hand. And then I look on the movie how she moves. She moves very slowly when she crossed the field, and the speed of that, I have no idea. But I just look at it and say, oh, that could be the speed of a snail. Okay, and the snail move at 0.03 miles per hour. So 0.01 meter per second. So the amount of energy, if you make the calculation, 1/2 multiplied by the mass multiplied by the square of the velocity is 2 × 10⁻⁵ joules. So that's not a lot. That's very small.
No.
And I wanted to find a comparison of what this amount of energy is, and it's very, very difficult, in fact, to find some comparison because this amount of energy is extremely small. So I decided to do a kind of a comparison. I was wondering if the aura will also protect the Emperor against mosquitoes. Right?
Ooh, that's a good question because I was thinking, obviously, it's for projectiles to protect, but you could get malaria or some other disease from a mosquito, and it could take you out.
So thanks to the internet.
What did you find?
Thanks to the internet, I found the mass of a mosquito, average mass, which is 2.5 milligrams. The speed of a mosquito flying is 2 kilometers per hour, so it's very small. And the amount of energy is 4 × 10⁻⁷. So 100 times less than the amount of energy of the consort hands coming close to the aura. So this field will protect the Emperor against mosquito attack because the amount of energy of the mosquito flying is less than the amount of energy of the hand of the consort coming close to him. So we have found in this show, we have the perfect instruments against attack of mosquitoes, mosquito bites. And I can't wait to have this being invented so we can finally protect ourselves against those.
Yes, no more bug spray, just a shield, which sounds so much cooler. And it seems like this shield, the emperors themselves can do damage because we see Day backhand somebody, which was an amazing scene. He's obviously very volatile when he's having this conversation with the mathematicians that he calls in. And as you pointed out before we started recording, we have a couple interesting conversations this episode between academics and rulers or another kind of group of people. So what did you make of this conversation that Day has with the mathematicians and statisticians who were charged with understanding psychohistory and breaking it down and trying to figure out if Harry was right about the fall of the Empire? Because it seems like they haven't produced anything, and that's why Day is mad and he backhands one of them. What has a professor ever backhanded you, Franck?
I will be Day. I will be the Empire. I will be upset at them too, because here we have 6 or 7 people, I forgot the exact number, who are supposedly the elite of the nation in this field, and none of them seems to understand what Harry's been doing. So instead of saying that we don't really understand what Harry's been doing, they say Harry is wrong, which is very typical, by the way, in the world of academia. When we don't understand something, instead of thinking or recalculating or trying to find someone who knows how to do things, most of the time or often the academics will say it's wrong, the result is wrong. And you can see kind of this small arrogance of the academia here into this interaction. They basically destroyed Harry models, saying that it's counterfactual, and there's some arguments about it. But and they also say, well, we don't understand the model, but what we did is to look at the empire right now, and everything is in positive. The empire is expanded by any critical metrics. I think that's the term they use. So they don't really understand the work, but they say, look, what we see now, it's positively increasing, so the empire is not collapsing, so Harry is wrong. He even make fun of the theory of Harry, which is also totally inappropriate, but that's what academic will do. And then we have this interesting moment where the empire asks, so is there a possibility that this theory is right and the empire will collapse, basically? And I say, yes, it's not zero. And here we have this moment where the Emperor Day is so upset because there is a possibility. What he wanted as an answer is no, this is wrong. The theory is wrong. It's not going to happen. And in this case, this is a very good scientific argument. They say, no, there is still a possibility. They're very honest because there is in all these equations and all this study they did, they don't have no proof that this will not happen. And the emperor has a hard time understanding this. And that's a little bit the kind of interaction we have sometimes between scientific and politicians. We can tell them there is a chance, small, that something's going to happen, and sometimes they completely ignore it. I can give examples: climate change, etc., blah blah blah, for some part of some politicians. Or sometimes they overreact because this small percentage, they cannot really comprehend the statistical analysis behind it. So there is 1 or 0.04% chance that something is going to be extremely bad for society. They want to invest a lot of money in this. So I'm not giving example here, but I have a ton of them like that. And these interactions.
If I could interrupt, because I love this conversation. And I will say it also goes the opposite way, because in my career, sometimes I've talked with scientists or folks, and they'll say, oh, there's a possibility that this could happen. And I, in turn, like you say, will think, oh gosh, there's a possibility that an elephant will fall through my roof because you said, but I've learned to ask, well, what's the percentage? How much of a possibility is it? Because that, to your point, that nuance is really important. Mm-hmm. The probability of an elephant falling through my roof right now is very close to zero, but it's not zero. So I don't have to buy insurance for that. But, rain in Seattle, that probability is almost a given, right? But it's still, not 100% yes, not 100% no. So I love this. Yes.
And what is important, to go back to the elephant on the roof, if the elephant on the roof, the elephant is the size of a figurine and break your window, it's not that important. But if the elephant is the size of a city and wiped out an entire civilization, and if the probability is small but not zero, maybe you have to invest some money in this. So that's the thing. That's one of the problems we have actually in science. It's very difficult to basically separate probability to political agenda and also to finance. So, example, asteroid impact. That's one of the most common example given. There is a possibility that an asteroid will one day impact our planet and destroy a significant part of a city. It's not zero. It did happen in 1917 or something like that. The Tunguska. It could happen again. So what do? Do we invest $400 million to develop technology that will be able to divert an asteroid, or we just say, let's wait, let's hope it's not going to happen in the next 100 years? That's a decision that politicians need to do, and they need a scientist for that. So here we have the same example, but in this case, the collapse in an entire civilization, the empire.
Yes. Yes. And that's why he gets so upset. And one of the triggers for this conversation for Day to start exerting himself and trying to understand what's going on is before he calls in the statisticians, he gets an envoy from another planet, I believe, and this envoy tells him that Proxima Opal, who was a leader of the planet or the society, has passed on, and so her successor is being decided, and they assume it's going to be this individual who is supportive of the empire. But what this envoy says is, well, there's a chance this other Zephyr, this other candidate, could become the next Proxima, and she believes in luminism, which freaks all of the emperors out because luminism has to do with the soul being tied to the individual. And their interpretation of that is that the clones don't have souls because they're not individual. Yeah. Is that correct, Franck?
So I just would like to clarify, they all believe in luminism. This is what's going on here is there is two Zephyr. And the Zephyr Halima, the one that is challenging Zephyr Gilat, believe in this new kind of doctrine. In fact, it's not new. It's something that happened in the past, and she wants to...
Oh, you're right. Primary Octava.
Yes. It's a schism, basically, which has happened a lot in religion, where basically there is a different interpretation of different pages of a book or whatever, and basically a religion can split or take a different direction. And here, what we have, the fear is that luminism will take this direction into this doctrine, assuming that there is emperors and basically no soul. So if you don't have a soul, are you human? If you're not human, how could you be an emperor and lead people? That's the main issue here. So yes. We can talk about that, but that's not really science. But there is a lot behind this here.
See, I think it's related to science because we had a SETI talk not too long ago about the definition of life and whether or not you could even define life. And the emperors are, if you use the scientific definition of life, they're living sentient beings. What's being called into question is this idea of a soul, which almost all living human beings believe that souls exist, but science hasn't quite been able to pinpoint what it is, right? Is it something that escapes X-rays and, you just can't find it. We don't know what it is. So that's interesting to me. And it's hard for me to look at an individual, even a clone, and say they don't have a soul. But it rides that line of what's science and what's philosophy. So what do you think, Franck?
Well, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm not going to go too much into this. The existence of a soul never been proven yet, not been proven yet in science. Maybe one day we will find that there is something that could be associated to what we call a soul. Could be some energy, I don't know. Not been shown yet. It does not exist for scientists at the moment. Okay. In the case of those clients, for scientists, they are human. They are like perfectly human. They seems to have all the attributes that we give to a human being. So there is no reason for them not to be considered as human and have not to be able to lead an empire. And that's a very scientific point of view, because it's not because they were born artificially in a womb that is not a woman that we cannot say that they are not human. That's a very deep conversation. What is the true definition of a human being? And if you have ideas, you can post them at the bottom of this, and we can start talking about this in the future.
Yes, and there's just one other thing that will segue into another not science bit, but a part of this episode that I really appreciated. Very quickly, I read this wonderful NPR piece that we'll link below too about a family who had lived on a farm and they had this bull. and the bull was the sweetest, most loving. It was like a family pet. And they loved it so much that when the bull died, they cloned it. But the clone didn't have the same disposition.
Mm-hmm.
And the farmer actually got injured a couple times because when they looked at this bull, they thought it was the previous one. And even when he got injured in interviews, he said, "Oh, I know he didn't mean it." And so it's this interesting, like, what is a clone? How is it different than other clones? We'll link to it below. It's very interesting. And the reason I bring that up is because I loved the scenes with Dawn. Not him trying to kill himself, but what happens after that with Azura, the gardener, the botanist, because to me, they're setting up some sort of forbidden relationship between the two.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really talk about the empires and whether they obviously probably can't reproduce that way. So it's an interesting, is he going to branch out? Is he going to do something different? I don't know. But just in my mind, just because you're a clone doesn't mean you're going to be exactly like the one that came before you. So we'll see. I haven't seen any of the other episodes. So any other comments on this or Trantor?
There is. I listened to the podcast from the author of the show, and they pointed out something that I missed when I watched this episode. Demoiselle knew about this, the passing of Proxima Opal and the schism around schism. So it seems that somehow Demoiselle is religious. And that's a very interesting story as well, because she's a robot, an android. And she seems to kind of be related somehow to this religion. So now the question we have is that if someone who doesn't have a soul, a machine, can be a part of Luminism, then why not the Emperor be part of it? So
that's a good point. And maybe some sort of religious schism is the reason that there aren't any other robots like her. Didn't they mention some past conflict? So yeah, that's a really good point too. I also thought she seemed a little bit too happy when Day kicked Dusk off of the spaceship because he wanted to go because he doesn't trust Dusk's judgment anymore. And she seemed quite happy about this and the fact that he's ready to kind of be violent and authoritative. So I'm curious to see where that's going to go. She's an outlier to me. Should we talk about Terminus now?
Yes, Terminus. The beautiful
Let's talk about Terminus. Yes, the beautiful planet. The Anacreons have landed. They have Salvo. She's leading them to what they want, which is some sort of drive, apparently. And she manages through her smarts to capture the Grand Huntress, which is an amazing title. And the Grand Huntress, when she's in custody, there's a couple interesting conversations. I think what we should talk about first is Salvo, because Salvo seems to be able to read her emotions. She seems to be able to see into the future. What did you think of that, Franck?
Well, she has the same kind of power than she's a seer, I have the feeling. She can see
like Gail, right? Gail.
Yes.
Gail.
There is some relationship between those two. I'm curious to see what's going to happen when they're going to meet, because I think they will meet probably. She can read into Farah's mind and as well. She can basically kind of really know the deep connection and the deep thought about Farah. She found out that, for example, that Farah was on the planet during the bombing. She found out about a personal life as well. So it's an interesting power, and I think if she has that, it's for a good reason. At the beginning, it seems to us that she's just here as a warden to protect the Foundation, but I think she will play a significant role because of this power in the future. And what we have is a confrontation between her and Lewis. Lewis, the head of the Foundation. Who is like basically the university. It's led by academic. And they are completely disconnected from the reality, I have the feeling. Like they have no idea that how to use weapon to defend themselves. They assume that one person, the warden, will protect them all. And then we have this arguments between Lewis and Salvor, because Lewis thinks that Salvor is not part of Harry plans, and she's basically an outlier, and she's destroying Harry plans. So tell us what you think about that moment too.
Yes, because there's a lot of voiceover in this episode about free will versus destiny. And I think, that they talk about it a lot with the Empire. And I think that's kind of a nod to, are the clones all going to follow in the same steps? And then when we get to Terminus, it reminded me a lot of the book, because the book, there's always this discussion of, if I do this, am I acting out of the plan? Or if we sit back and wait, do we need to do something for Harry's plan to take action? I think Salvo, to me, is obviously a part of Harry's plan, because she has that vision of going back and being in Harry's. I think that she's in Harry's memory, because I think the kid in her vision is Reeb, his son, in the library. That's what I think. So I think she's definitely part of the plan. And I think, to your point, Lewis and the academics are completely out of touch, and they're not action oriented, and they sort of blindly trust the Empire to come save them. I don't think that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you agree, or do you feel differently?
No, I agree. I would just add that something. There is a moment in this episode where Lewis talk about Anacreons, and we call them barbarians, which is a very alienated way of calling people, because you don't understand them. You use basically a slur to define them. And this remind me, I thought, in fact, I'm pretty sure that the person who wrote that, who used this as a reference, the discussion we have currently in astronomy for the building of the TMT. And you probably remember there was a moment where there was some emails which has been leaked by people. In fact, no, it was not even leaked, it was official email. And some professor at the university called the people who were against the TMT a horde of native Hawaiian barbarians, something like that.
And you're talking about the telescope that they would like to build in Hawaii on top of a mountain. And the mountain has spiritual significance to some of the native Hawaiian, correct?
That's correct. And that's, this email basically had a huge impact on the way people perceive the TMT. And I don't want to talk about that too long, but that's one thing that academia has an issue with, is often to kind of use words which are not appropriate to define people they don't understand, basically. And that's, in this case, we have
who feel differently than them, right? It's just a difference. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the academics of the foundation are completely disconnected from the reality.
Yes, and it's not smart to insult the person who has, they're essentially, the Anacreons are better prepared. They're executing a plan. And this academic has the audacity to call her a slur, which is not very smart.
Not very smart.
For being a smart man, not very smart. Yes. That's a very, I loved the kind of mirroring of the two different plot lines, because, as we said earlier, there was another conversation that was interesting between academics and an outside party. Anything else on Terminus? There's a lot of action going on. There's something that happens at the very end, but is there anything else sciencey that we should talk about on Terminus?
No, I think that's good for me for this episode. We're gonna do. We have 2 more to do in the next 2 weeks. So
yes, and at the very end, we get a peek at Gael, who has been frozen in time. And I suspect she's inside the vault. I don't know, but I'm excited. That was a very good cliffhanger. What did you make of that, Franck?
It seems that she's going to come back in the story very soon. But what is interesting in Foundation, we don't know at which time she will come back. She may come back at the same. She may come back on Terminus or any of the non-planet, but we have no idea she will be in the same time that Salvor or after. We don't know. We will see that. And that's one of the things I like in the Foundation, the book, like this discussion and the change of time, thousands of years. And in the show, they're probably going to do that as well. But it's very complicated to do that in a movie because people die and the world may change, etc. So we will see how they manage that for Return of Gal.
Yes. I'm very excited. She was a great character. I think we get more of her in episode 5. And I remember there's one other thing that I thought you would appreciate. Hugo, when he's speaking with Farah, the Grand Huntress, he taps his temple and you see his eyes flash blue. And I think we had a discussion earlier about what's up with Hugo. And I do think he's had a lot of body modifications. Mm-hmm. That to me was like a sign. He was doing, either he was signaling something to her so she would trust him, or he was, doing some sort of analysis. I don't know. But I'm sure you caught that.
No, I did not. That's not, you're taking me by surprise.
You did it?
I did not see that.
Oh yeah. Go back and rewatch because he's talking to her, or, we can cut this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he leans in and he goes like this and his eyes flash blue. So
yeah, we talk about this civilization having body modification and basically connect. That's why he can live longer. They can live longer. They look younger. So it may be possible that he has some kind of implant to record data or to analyze the way people talk, so then knows if they're lying or not, for instance.
Right. And they mentioned that too, because Farah, I believe, has, they say, nanoglass. Her eye isn't organic. It's not the eye she was born with because of the bomb. And so, yeah. All right. Anything else? Parting thoughts, Franck?
No, I hope to see you next week for another episode.
Yes, definitely. We'll get all caught up. And thank you, dear viewer, for tuning in today and overanalyzing the science part of the Foundation with us. We are a product of the SETI Institute. SETI Institute is a nonprofit that's mission is to understand the nature and origin of life in the universe. So if you like the Foundation, if you like our discussions of science, check out all the links below. You can get notified when a new episode of the Grudge Report goes live. You can learn more about the SETI Institute, and you can even donate if you are so inclined, because as I mentioned, we are a non-profit. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Empire.